Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Creative Solutions to Grow Your Fleet in 2022, presented by Merchants Fleet. I'm Brian Peach, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we'll try to address all of them. However, if we do not get to yours, don't worry, you'll be contacted by email with a response after the event. Our presenters today are George Albright, Director of Fleet Products at Merchants Fleet, Stephen Kurt, VP of Operations at Merchants Fleet, and Stefan Dasaki, Senior Fleet Consultant at Merchants Fleet. And I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to George. George, take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Brian. Really appreciate it. First up for our topics today is our ever-evolving and always dynamic supply chain. Stephen, would you please start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, George. So I don't think that this would be any news to anybody attending this today, but there continues to be severe challenges in the supply chain, really across the board. I don't think that any OEM or supplier is not hit by in some way, shape, or form. You know, we took some snippets here to demonstrate some of the more recent challenges that have been faced, but you know, at the end of the day, the supply chain challenges and the disruption that we have felt throughout model year 21 and model year 22, they are still actively going on. They are still real. And when you look at something like the Russia and Ukraine conflict, there are still going to be lots of downstream impacts from that. Something as small as raw materials will have drastic impacts throughout the supply chain. Prices of materials will continue to be impacted. So at the end of the day, unfortunate news from a supply chain perspective is that it's likely going to continue for the foreseeable future, and some shortages, prices will be impacted and in flux.
Thanks for helping level set us, Stephen. It's important for us to be grounded with the current environmental conditions. What I'd like to do is move towards how we can plan for the upcoming 23 and 24 model years, but also help us navigate the remainder of this year. Stefan, I'd like to start with hearing your perspective.
Well, thank you, George. Well, I think it's going to be very important to plan way ahead of time, right? So typically people look at 3 months ahead, 6 months ahead. It's very important to start building, to reverse engineer the process, right? So look at the milestones. Where do you want to be? How many vehicles do you want in 9 months, in 12 months? And determine your needs today, right? For your 2023 and 2024 models. So you want to start planning. So look at where you want to go and back up the numbers. So you start, you have to work with your OEM reps, right now, right? So learn about allocations, limited orders, because a lot of that is going on where OEMs are allocating vehicles to their, fleet clients, based on past volume. So you want to learn about those things so that you can start playing and think about, well, do you need something different than what's currently available or different from what will be available in the future?
The thing that I would add on to what Stefan said there is, at the end of the day, the model year 23 planning, as we look to how we can bring vehicles into our fleet in a more effective manner for model year 22, the planning has to start now for model year 23 at the end of the day. And if you're not in that process yet of starting that planning, you may end up a little bit behind, because order banks are going to be opening very soon. And you really need to be planning through each of those steps. So, when we think about the order banks and some strategies and how do we approach it, at the end of the day, from an order to delivery strategy perspective, we want to make sure that we're getting our orders into the order banks as soon as possible. And really, you gotta have to go through and reset your delivery expectations. If previously, a vehicle would be delivered in 16 weeks after it was delivered, it could take up to 26 weeks or more right now. So really redefine your expectations, because you need to start planning for that. The other thing to be thinking of from an ordering perspective is to really think about your suppliers, right? Are you able to get flexible with a couple of different suppliers at the end of the day, whether that be different OEMs, kind of looking at upfitters as well, work with your upfitters. something that's really important when you think about the supply chain challenges that are going on are there needs to be good communication with each step in the supply chain. So with the OEMs, doing that pre-planning, making sure you try to get an idea of how many vehicles you'll actually be receiving from each of the OEMs, whether they're on an allocation model or not. And then that needs to flow down through into the upfitter. And if you have other suppliers that are going into that upfitting process, you need to be thinking through and making sure that you're planning and staying up to date with everything in that regard. Stefan, I think was hoping you could jump in here and talk a little bit about the OEM calls that we recommend for our clients.
Yeah, so it's very important to stay engaged, right? So the same way as a fleet manager, fleet administrator, or whatnot, you want to be engaged with your OEM rep. We have been having regular calls, right, with several OEMs to keep the conversation open, right? What are our needs, what are our plans, and what are theirs? You have to keep in mind that each OEM has a different timeline, right, for their order bank. And just to have that door open, always communicate to make sure that you know exactly what's going to happen when. There's a lot of uncertainty, but as long as you keep the dialogue, you can anticipate, knowing your needs for 2023, start working with leadership to get the funding as early as possible, because those windows, as uncertain as they are, when they're going to open, they're not going to be open for too long, right? So make sure you communicate your need for 2023 replacements so you can work with leadership to get the funding approved as early as possible, so that as soon as you get the opportunity to order a vehicle, then you do so.
So as we think about navigating the supply chain shortages, these are really 5 steps that we kind of want to summarize in terms of from an order planning perspective. So first up, better planning. The better you can plan at the end of the day, the more engaged you can be with your suppliers, your OEMs, your upfitters, you will be more successful through the ordering process and have better expectations on, what quantity of vehicles that you will be receiving. Step 2 at the end of the day is prepare for delays. I think that there's going to be a lot of unknowns when you look at model year 23. So, working through those unknowns, at the end of the day, there's labor shortages, there's trucker shortages, there's a multitude of things that we know are going to be impacting the order to delivery process. And then there's another number of things that could come up that we aren't aware of. I'm sure nobody saw, the price of iron spiking and those types of things. So those are things that you need to be prepared for. Allocations is a key step in this process. Stefan mentioned it at the beginning, but allocations are going to be key. I think that you'll see some OEMs go to an allocation model that haven't previously. I think some of the OEMs that went with an allocation previously may go away from that. Everybody's experiencing things differently, and they're making those decisions based upon their clients' feedback of how the process went last year. So I would expect and be talking to your OEM reps about what is the process of the vehicle spec that I'm planning on ordering. Make sure you're talking through that with them, and that if they are going to go to an allocation basis, be prepared to work with them on the quantity of vehicles that you need. And if they're not going to go into an allocation basis, make sure that you're trying to get your order spec finalized, everything up front, so that you can get your orders into the order bank as quickly as possible. I would just add on here, though, that something that we don't recommend is really flooding the order banks. And what I mean by that is if an OEM is not going with an allocation basis, if you need 100 Ford Transits, we would not recommend entering 200 on the off chance that you end up with 100. We know that supply has continued to fall short of the demand, but it's really important that you partner with your OEM and your OEM reps so that they have a good understanding of what you need and talk and communicate with them so that they can try to meet that to the best of their capabilities. Step 4 is backup planning, and Stefan and I have a couple ideas that we're going to float by everybody for backup plans and some things that you can be asking your fleet management provider if you're working with one or any of the suppliers in your supply chain to come up with some of those strategies. And then the last thing is just keep an eye on how the production volumes are going, and lean on your OEM, your fleet management provider, your suppliers at the end of the day to work through that. And it's looking very strongly like model year 23 production will be up, and it will be more than where vehicles were produced in model year 22. However, it's going to continue to outpace the demand, or fall short of the demand, I should say, because we kind of have a bottleneck building up where, model year 21, people had a lot of vehicles canceled or they were unbuildable. Model year 22, you're seeing instances where you're not going to be receiving all the vehicles that you were looking for in a lot of cases. And so it's going to kind of continue because we continue to have high demand and demand that will outpace the supply on these vehicles. So I mentioned backup planning, George, if you don't mind going to the next slide here. One of the primary ways that you can start to think about as backup plans is short-term rentals, and focus on fast, flexibility, and easy. Really, the idea here is to partner with your fleet management provider, partner with a rental provider, whomever you have in your fleet or in your fleet management suite, and think about how you can work these types of rentals in and be communicating ahead of time. If you need a vehicle because you have a project starting up, or you have a vehicle going down because of maintenance, because you've had to run your vehicles a little longer than you previously have, think through, can I put a short-term rental in until my factory order comes in? Or if it's a short-term project of 6 months, how can I work a truck, if it meets my application, into there, so that at the end of the day, you're building flexibility into what you're doing, and you're mitigating some of those supply chain challenges by filling the gap with these rentals.
Yeah, and I want to add, and this is good for many industries, right? So whether you're a delivery company or a small construction company, as long as you have a vehicle, ideally you want, vehicles that are, ready to use. They don't require, a lot of upfitting. And so, beyond just, filling the gap, you also, maximize the efficiency of your cash, right? If you have a short-term project, you may not want to lease a vehicle for 5 years, getting something for the job, get the job done, and then move on with something else. So it's always something to keep in mind, stay creative in just the way you're approaching the market. And speaking of that, right, being a bit open-minded. So what we want, what we recommend our clients today is to be very open-minded. You have to seek alternative vehicles and OEMs. It used to be that some people were GM people or Ford people. It was either or, never the two, never one, and we are coming at a place where, there's such scarcity that if you really want to put your drivers, in a vehicle, if you want a job to be performed, you need a vehicle. And so there comes a time where you open your ears and you listen to what's out there, because we do not have as much. So you have to start looking into your inventory, looking at what do you have, what do you need, looking at how many drivers do you have, how many vehicles do you need, or how many vehicles do you have, right? Check with your FMC to see if there are any pools of inventory that are available. And so start thinking about, I may not get the one that I've always got in the past, but what else is there that can, fill the need? And, many ways, even out of stock, sometimes that happens. You need a job because there's a construction, gig somewhere. Well, the driver needs something. And if it's not the one that you've bought before, as long as it's available, you want to make sure that you put your hands on it, because it is not going to be easy. And, and one of the things, making, having a diverse fleet, different OEMs, it's actually easier now to manage that, because now you've got, all those connected capable vehicles that you can, put into one platform, right? And start learning and analyzing your data, as opposed to where it used to be, well, it's easier to manage just one OEM because I know all the data laid in one place. So time to just open up your minds, get active, just listen to what's out there, because the scarcity of today is not going away as soon as we would have expected.
So I want to jump in to say that, in addition to, talking to your FMC about pools of inventory that may be available, or lightly used vehicles, there's other options that are out there too. So talk to your fleet management provider. They could have access to a pool that, they are personally managing. And also make sure that you're leveraging them or working directly with your suppliers, whether it be the OEM or the upfitter, There are some inventory pools that are out there that may meet your spec, so make sure that you are engaging with them and talking with them, because at the end of the day, not only is that an asset that could be available, but it is also an asset that could be readily available and is already produced or on its way through the production line. So make sure that you're having those conversations and that you're engaging at all levels, really, for any potential options that are out there.
Yeah, because of the circumstances, I think this is actually a great time to evaluate your fleet software and ensure that you have the ability to easily manage data from multiple OEMs. So consider that roughly 85% of all new vehicles produced are connected capable, which means that you don't need to use a traditional telematics plug-in device to gather driver behavior and vehicle data. If you're partnered with a fleet management company today, you should really expect your telematics solution to have connected capability. For example, at Merchants, we have Total Connect, which aggregates telematics data from multiple sources for your entire fleet dashboard. Long-term, the connected approach can also help you maintain optimal vehicle health, reduce your unscheduled maintenance spend, and maximize your vehicle uptime.
Right. Yeah, something else that you can do, with this supply constraint, you have to work with what you have, right? So time to look at your fleet, and if you have a consultant, for example, helping you with your day-to-day or your analysis, look at your fleet. Look at the vehicles that aren't being used, the vehicles that are underutilized. If you have telematics, you can leverage that and pull the data to see, well, which ones of these vehicles haven't moved, over the past 3 months. Which ones of these vehicles are moving at half the rate of the other vehicles. So you can maybe pull, those vehicles and do some allocation within your own business, right? You want to look at those spare vehicles. You want to make sure that the ones that are underutilized are redeployed efficiently. And then you have to look at where the vehicle requests are coming from and then take action. So it's a matter of just looking at, leveraging everything that you have, whether it's telematics, whether it's just fuel spent. Who hasn't, purchased fuel over the past 3 months? Who hasn't had an oil change over the past 6 months? Then you can start looking at, well, these vehicles may be here in excess capacity, and this is just a good time to shift the distribution and move them where they're needed, so that, in the case you have no other recourse, at least the way it looks at the moment, you can keep on working with what you have. Okay. And it's very important, in the same line of thought, to keep vehicles that fit the job, right? So vehicles based on the job description. So if you've got a guy driving an F-250 when in fact he's just a field manager, well, maybe he can drive an F-150 and vice versa. So you have to make sure that you get vehicles that fit the needs for the work. Okay. And the last thing, which is, it's rather ironic, right? 2022, typically when you have engagements with your clients, you say, well, do not order out of stock. Well, things have changed. When you can get your hands on something, get your hands on it, right? It's very important at this time, because we have very limited visibility into what is going to happen. Production is going to go up, certainly over what it was last year, but definitely not where it was prior to 2020. So when you can acquire a vehicle out of stock, when you can locate a vehicle somewhere and you can get your hands on it, go and take action as long as you need it, because those things are just, they go fast, right? And there's some benefits to it. Definitely, the benefits, is that you get a vehicle fast, right? You get something right when you need it. The main con is that it's typically more expensive. It may not be exactly the way you spec your vehicles, right? You may have a guy working a construction site and having a F-150 Lariat with, leather seats, well, that's good for him, but it's deviating again, from your processes. But for the time being, when you can't put your hands on something, just take advantage, because we do not see too many opportunities for clients to get their hands on the vehicle outside of, the OEM process, which is very uncertain.
So I think it's important as you look to plan out really over the next couple of years to get a good grounded understanding that the demand for EVs is increasing. That's really happening globally, but it is also very much happening here in the United States more than ever. I think if you were to go and read any type of publication, there's EVs being worked in there at the end of the day. So some things that you should know, right? Several OEMs are prioritizing EV production over standard ICE engine production. And so it's important that if you are thinking about EVs, that you want to start to be working them into your fleet, because you don't really want to be left behind at the end of the day. It's really time to start thinking about it. And I think we have some analysis that George is going to walk us through where we think the supply will drastically fall short of the demand at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen, one of the mantras we've adopted, right, at Merchants is electrification is really more of a journey than an absolute destination. Not everyone's going to be at the exact same place at the exact same time. With that, hybrid vehicles, they might be an appropriate option for portions of a fleet. There are well-established lines of hybrid electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Now, with that, you still incur some of the costs associated with maintaining an internal combustion engine, but you can reap some of the fuel savings that have a really significant impact on a fleet's bottom line. One example is the new Ford Maverick. We've been taking reservations for it. It's been a popular model with fleets right now due to its fuel efficiency benefits. So definitely something to consider. But I think that's great dialogue, gents. What I'd like to do is spend some time discussing vehicle life cycling and specifically how fleets can navigate that decision to extend. So when we take a look at where we're at right now, you got to make sure that you know what your vehicles are worth. In February, we observed the used car prices surge in the United States between 30 and 40% over the course of the preceding 18 months, which is massive. I mean, you can take advantage of the current market. You should take advantage of it. Even though vehicle costs can still go up, you're going to be in a good position overall to cycle. And if you're partnered with a fleet management company today, you need to have the conversation with your account manager, as you might be able to take advantage of programs that can furnish funds up front and handle a remarketing process from start to finish. Now, if you're not in a position to take advantage of cycling your vehicles out right now, you need to focus your efforts more than ever on optimizing the health of your existing vehicles. And so with that, we want to talk about some of the impacts we've seen from supply chain on repair turnaround times and cost. Now, those dramatic impacts are due to a collision of multiple factors. We've seen a high average age of vehicles, which have led to increased unscheduled repairs, a reduction of repair parts availabilities for those vehicles requiring unscheduled repairs, a shortage of drivers transporting to available parts repair facilities, and finally, a smaller pool of mechanics available to install the available parts. Now, an independent survey that was conducted by the IMR in 2021 found that 50% of providers reported frequent disruptions in securing parts. The term intergalactic backorder was once a tongue-in-cheek reference to parts delay. It's increasingly become applicable to both parts complex and basic. Additionally, we're also seeing supply chain gaps affecting overall costs, which are resulting in increased parts and labor prices. In 2021 alone, we've seen 6 nationwide providers increase parts and labor prices between 2 and 14%. So we recommend 3 targeted approaches to try to remain flexible in this environment. If you're currently handling your maintenance in-house, we recommend budgeting for increased operational support required to seek multiple repair facility options. Additionally, you should also consider factoring in inflationary impact to your maintenance spend. Make sure that's been incorporated into your budget. And finally, increase your PM compliance engagement through additional field communication and campaigns which reward the optimal compliance achieved within your fleet. With many of our fleet managers across the country holding on to vehicles until orders are delivered, extending the life cycle for those aging vehicles is paramount. Knowing the risk of keeping older vehicles in your fleets become critically important for an organization. Stefan, can I get your thoughts on that too? I know we talked a little bit about this leading up to our conversation today.
Yes, of course. So it's very important to keep your vehicles maintained, right? So no matter how long you want to hold on to them, maintenance is always important. It gets a bit challenging when you have older vehicles. We have about 40% of fleet vehicles today, I think, that we estimate are past the optimal term. And so the results can be tremendous in terms of cost, right? So you have, increase in downtime, right? So vehicles that get older, they tend to go to the shop, sometimes more frequently and sometimes for more expensive and lengthy repairs. You have a decline, year after year in FMV value if you have to, turn those vehicles in. You have an excess in fuel spend, for example. So it's very important to keep those vehicles always maintained, especially the older units, right? So if you're not able to procure new vehicles because either you've ordered them and you're not seeing the end of the light at the end of the tunnel just yet, the vehicles that you're holding on to, you have to make sure that you adhere very strictly to a maintenance schedule so that you do not incur those costs that typically come with vehicle age. Okay. So many things that can be done. It's just making sure that the schedule for maintenance is tight. Typically, with newer vehicles, you get an oil change every 10,000 miles, right? Vehicles that's past its prime, you want to go maybe every 7,000 miles and maybe even 5,000 miles, sometimes even every 3,000 miles, just to make sure that you do enough work upstream to make sure that downstream the issues, if they arise, are not as grave as it could be.
And we know that for a lot of the fleets out there, with that need to hold on to vehicles longer, we're recommending some really targeted tips. Stefan talked a little bit about them to make sure that your fleet's running as smoothly as those cycles are extended. So consider implementing pre-trip inspections across your fleet. And if you have a driver policy where pre-trip inspections are already done, make sure that policy reflects at least some sort of enforcement tool, some sort of reporting tool, something in which there's feedback with your location and your drivers to ensure that the pre-trip inspections are actually being completed. Frequently check idle vehicles. We saw this coming out of the pandemic. There are vehicles that were not run on a regular basis that had either dead batteries or rotten tires, or even right up to infestation of pests within the hoods of the vehicles themselves underneath. So make sure that the vehicles are taken out and run on a routine basis. Take their vehicles into full service locations for comprehensive inspections. While it is very important to continue to leverage quick lube locations and facilities are an important part of the infrastructure, you do need to make sure that those vehicles are also going into full service bays periodically to ensure you don't have to take your vehicle out of one facility, take it to another to ensure that you're having that comprehensive PM work done. We talked about connected vehicles and telematics data. That's critical for higher mileage vehicles. And then finally, making sure that you're implementing a compliance program or a scorecard. All of these things done in conjunction can really help you as a fleet manager in being able to extend the life cycles of your vehicles. Now, Stefan, Stephen, thank you very much. I want to hand it back to Brian and open the floor for some questions now.
Great. Again, like you said, thank you very much, guys. With the time remaining, let's answer some of the questions that have been coming in during the presentation. But first, also, I just kind of want to set it up here, just kind of give you guys a chance to kind of describe what Merchants is doing to help clients navigate through the supply chain challenges right now.
Yeah, I think great question. Thanks for that question. At the end of the day, I think Merchants is trying to do it from a couple of different avenues, right? And I think we walked through today a lot of the ways that Merchants is doing it. We're encouraging our clients to partner with their OEMs, have those pre-meetings, talk to them about what their allocation is actually going to be looking like. Working with our consulting team like Stefan, who does a great job in doing analysis on, hey, if I get X number of vehicles and I really wanted Y, how does that impact my maintenance spend? How do all those impacts have downstream? Because it will be kind of a snowball effect at the end of the day. So we're working through all those types of plannings, analysis, and really trying to partner with our clients closely there. And the other primary thing that we have is, we have our mobility fleet, which several of our clients have been able to take advantage of. And it's a fleet of about 25,000 vehicles that we leverage as really short-term sharing capability. But we have had the application where we've been able to leverage some of that inventory that we have and provide it to our clients on whether it be a short term or even flipping it over time to a long-term type of approach from a rental lease or direct lease. We have that flexibility built in, but whether it be a truck, a box truck, a cargo van, a passenger van, we have some flexibility there that we can certainly help with, and that's probably the primary ways that we are trying to address the challenges. But it's definitely unique and unprecedented times, that's for sure.
Yes, that is for sure. Going here, someone's asking, is there still a place for FHEV and PHEV versus going full EV? Their current routes do not support the sensitivity of the EV battery with the fluctuation in climates.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. So, really, as George mentioned, when we were talking about the supply, it was going to fall short of the demand in the EV space. It's a journey. The EV journey for every single person and every single fleet is different at the end of the day. And it comes down ultimately to what are the goals of your company? What are the goals of your fleet from a vehicle perspective, application perspective, and then also ESG and, working towards, improving the environment. So all those things have to come into play. And a lot of fleets are challenged because a vehicle that they have today or an application that they have today doesn't have a great fit, whether that be the size of the vehicle. It could also be the distance that the vehicle has to cover in a single day. So, we strongly encourage any customer to work with, their consultants, whether it be working with merchants or with another FMC, work with your consultants, because at the end of the day, you need to map that path for how do you ultimately end up where your goal is. If your goal is 50% EV by 2030, well, maybe you start working some plug-in hybrids in and have a goal for plug-in hybrids by 2025. But you really need to start that planning process and work with your provider and your suppliers to do an analysis to see how do I find a vehicle that can improve my gas mileage, improve the environment, and at the end of the day, meet the application that I have. And merchants has traditionally helped our clients strategize and map that out through their ultimate goals, whether that be a 2025 goal, a 2030 goal, or anything in between. We're able to help with that.
Great, very helpful. And this one might be for George, I think. As we transition to EV, this customer, I'm just reading it verbatim, are there concerns of mechanics not being properly trained to service, which can create, obviously, longer repair times?
There could be. I think it's definitely valuable for us to discuss. So independent repair facilities are a big part of our ecosystem today. All right. They are going to be the ones that struggle predominantly with being able to get the training done and also with getting the additional equipment that'll go into doing the more complex repairs of EVs. Now, the other piece to keep in mind is that the majority of the EVs that are coming out today are going to have significant warranties that are going to protect them up till 8 years, 10 years in a lot of cases. So I think our national account network is more than equipped right now to be able to support to that point in our vendor locate tool. And anyone at free of charge can go and download our tool today, and they can look at our vendor app and see electric vehicle repair facilities within their area or region. I think we loaded somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500 in the network at the beginning of the year. National account vendors throughout the United States today. Now, obviously, that's not to the number of the 45,000 we have in our network that can work on internal combustion engine vehicles. But when you think about where we're at right now for how many EVs we have on the road and what we're projecting, I do think that the supply is going to be able to meet the demand, at least to keep us level set to where we're at right now. And where we're at right now, in general, with having enough mechanics for internal combustion engines has been a challenge for years. So I think, long story short, I don't think we're necessarily going to be in a worse position than we are today, specific for EVs. I wouldn't look at that necessarily as a reason to not adopt, but definitely take a look and check, see how many EV vendors are out there today near where your vehicles are stored. You might be a little surprised.
Great. following along here. Maybe this one I'm going to go to Stephen. This customer is asking, is now a good time to implement hybrid or EV vehicles during the shortages? I mean, do you anticipate they will feel the shortage as well?
Yeah, it's another great question. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the biggest constraint surrounding vehicles, it will still be microchips. Each microchip part is custom to that application. So if you have electronic lumbar support, right, that is a exact microchip that is spec to that specific part of the vehicle. So, and vehicles at the end of the day have between 1,200 and 1,800 microchips. Now, it's a big number. I remember when I first heard it, it shocked me. And the more complex the electronics in the vehicle, so EVs, plug-in hybrids, tend to have more microchips than some of the less complex, lower trimmed or ICE engine vehicles. So the important thing to remember is that EVs and plug-in hybrids are going to be impacted. Any hybrid really are going to be impacted by the supply chain similarly. What ultimately is going to come down to is how are the OEMs prioritizing each of their models? Are they prioritizing EVs? Are they prioritizing plug-in hybrids over ICE engines? Some may choose to do that, some may not. So I think that's where really, based upon your application and your selector, it's important to have that dialogue with your fleet management provider or your OEM reps in partnership so that you can build out a good strategy. But ICE engines will continue to be built, plug-in hybrid engines will continue to be built, and EVs will continue to be built at the end of the day.
Okay, and Stefan, again, someone's asking, how long is it taking to get from order to delivery on light-duty EV trucks?
Well, I think the good answer here is going to be a very consulting answer. It's like, it depends, right? So for the Ford F-150 Lightning, for example, the lead time is about 30 weeks. Now, you keep in mind, it's always only an estimate. I think what we try to emphasize during this conversation is the need to plan way ahead of time, right? Always bake in some added lead time. So the OEM tells you about 28 to 30 weeks. Well, from when the order banks open up until then, a few things may change. Something that's rather anecdotal. First, I'm going to build on what Steven just said about like the chips, right? You have a shortage of chips, right? And you have many of them that go into electric vehicles. But something that's rather, not talked about within the whole supply chain is, the transport of all this stuff, right? I met a merchant sailor, I think half a year ago, and he was telling me of a strike in Long Beach, California, because of a strike in Australia, right? Because as it turns out, because of the restrictions, because of COVID, merchant sailors, they look forward to getting off the ship anywhere they went, and they weren't able to do that. So a lot of them quit, right? So you have to bake in so many things. So you have shortages of chips, raw materials, but also of labor, not just at the plants, but also, within the transport, right? The back end, the downstream of the value chain. So 30 weeks is a good way to start. But if you want to be very safe, you want to add, a couple months, maybe 6 weeks to be sure that you don't get a nasty surprise.
That's great advice there. And this one will go to Stephen. With the conflict in Europe, which you touched on at the beginning, what specific impacts can we anticipate when it comes to our supply chain?
Yeah, so I believe that Russia's GDP to the global economy ends up being somewhere around, just under 2%. And that doesn't seem like a big number, but it will have large ripple effects. The conflict is, really going to drive prices up. Like if you look at the price of nickel, I believe the price of nickel a couple weeks ago spiked 250%. Wow. And that hadn't happened in a very, very long time. And the net result is it's happening because of the conflict in Europe. So I would expect that there's going to be several raw materials that are see pricing go up because the supply demand curve is just going to become out of whack, and there's not going to be enough supply. That's ultimately going to lead into some parts challenges, whether it be for brand new vehicles or, George was mentioning it as well, part shortages on maintenance of vehicles can become a challenge. So I think that it's hard to put a finger on exactly what the impacts will be, but I think it's going to be pretty heavy. And then there are some OEMs that do have parts suppliers that are coming out directly out of Ukraine, and they have been directly impacted. So I think there's going to be some challenges that we know, like raw materials, and then there's going to be some unforeseen downstream impacts that we probably don't know today, and may not know until the time.
Okay. And let's get another one in here. What would you say? How have OEMs reacted to the order bank flood strategy that some fleets have leveraged?
I think at the end of the day, it's a great question, Brian. Whether or not they're doing an allocation process up front or doing an allocation process after the fact, there's only a limited quantity of production slots for vehicles. And in many cases, in many models, this isn't, too broad of a statement. It's a lot of cases, it's the primary models. They're not able to produce the quantity of vehicles that they need to. So it's become a challenge for them to manage through. And it's difficult because they're able to work through it if they do the allocation process up front and eliminate it. But then if it goes after the fact and, there's 100,000 orders in an order bank and the OEM can only produce 50,000, well, then they're having to make really hard decisions. And, being respectful to them making those decisions, they're not easy. They're having to come and say at the end of the day that, people that want vehicles aren't able to get enough. So the more that we can talk to them up front, the more that we can communicate and be on the same page that this is the quantity of vehicles that I need for my fleet. Can you, make this quantity of vehicles for me? The better off everyone will be. And everybody's in the same boat, right? Pretty much every fleet is not getting the quantity of vehicles that they need. So the more we can plan, the more we can be respectful of, we need 100, order 100. I think the better off that, everyone will be. And also the better the relationship will be between a fleet, an FMC, and that OEM.
Great. Very helpful, guys. That is about all the time we have for today. But again, for anyone who asked a question that wasn't answered, those questions will be provided to these panelists so they can follow up via email to answer your questions individually. We hope that you all enjoyed today's webinar. I want to again thank George Albright, Stephen Kurt, and Stefan Tasaki, as well as the entire Merchants Fleet organization for today's presentation. I also want to mention that this webinar will be available on demand on the Automotive Fleet website at automotivefleet.com/webinars. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.